At the beginning of the year 1990, the last decade of the 20th century, the International Maritime Organization introduced a new and updated International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, or IMDG Code for short, which is at the same time simplified and yet more comprehensive than that issued previously. Marine pollution aspects are now dealt with in more detail. Volume 1, as you see, contains a general introduction, Annex 1 packing, and indexes. These are all updated where necessary from the earlier code. And at the end, there will also be a list of definitions to make it easier for the user of the code to find all the definitions and other terms used throughout the code in the different volumes. Volume 2 covers Class 1, Class 2 and Class 3. Volume 3 covers Classes 4 and 5, with full coverage of the divided classes, 4.1 inflammable solids, 4.2 spontaneously combustibles, and 4.3 dangerous when wet. Class 5 is fully covered with 5.1 oxidizing agents and 5.2 organic peroxides. Volume 4 contains classes 6, 7, 8 and 9. Class 6 is divided into 6.1 poisons and 6.2 infectious substances. Class 7 covers radioactive materials, Class 8 corrosives, and Class 9 miscellaneous dangerous substances and articles, which now also covers the environmentally hazardous substances, that is, marine pollutants. On this page, you will see, for instance, the new marine pollutants mark and the new Class 9 label necessary for polychlorinated and polyhalogenated biphenyls. New to the IMDG codebooks is this supplement, which basically contains the emergency procedures, EMS, the medical first aid guide, MFAG, and the solid chemicals in bulk, BC code. The manuals will still be available separately, but the supplement may be a more convenient way of presenting the material. In addition, in the supplement, there are sections dealing with reporting procedures, packing cargo transport units, and use of pesticides in ships. There is also an appendix containing some of the most important IMO resolutions, standards and guidelines of importance to the master and his officers to have readily at hand. Well, so much for the theory. Yet, how essential it all is, the result of years of arduous study, research and discussion. But in practice, it actually controls, guides and assists so much from the documentation, the labelling, the transport to and through the docks and on and off the ships that may carry the cargoes to far corners of the world. All very efficient, all very practical. And it's all very different from years ago when ships like this bore the burden of the world's commercial traffic. The major dangers at sea in those days were the elements, wind and water, and shipwreck. But cargoes and the ways of carrying them have changed dramatically. Today's ships serve a world of high technology, and many of the products involved have properties and characteristics which can make them very dangerous. For this reason, special precautions are taken during their packing, handling and transport for the safety of the ship and her crew, and all those involved in dangerous goods transport operations. On all the world's oceans, ships are carrying these dangerous goods safely, day after day, week after week, because the transport of dangerous goods is closely regulated by internationally accepted procedures. This video introduces and explains the principles involved in the safe transport of dangerous goods by sea. By law, it is always the duty and responsibility of the ship's master to decide what is carried on his ship. Through his officers, he must know of any dangerous goods which are to be carried. He must be satisfied that they have been properly declared, packaged and labelled, and correctly stowed. And he must be aware of any special precautions that have to be taken, for he is responsible for the safety of the ship and crew. Naturally, all this calls for a great deal of backup information, special procedures, and care by all concerned. In practice, the acceptance of dangerous goods for transport by sea is usually arranged in conjunction with qualified shore staff employed by the ship owner or ship operator. The need for internationally accepted regulations and procedures was recognized long ago. The international conventions dealing with safety of life at sea, known as SOLA 74 for short, and with prevention of pollution from ships, known as MARPOL 7378, contain specific regulations to control the transport of dangerous and polluting cargoes in ships, so that they may be carried with the minimal risk practicable. These regulations are supported by detailed provisions contained in the IMDG code. The code provides information and advice about the dangerous goods in packaged form most frequently carried by sea. It's specifically designed to assist ship and shore staff to handle dangerous goods in safety, applying to every type of ship, conventional or specialized. The code has been developed and is kept up to date by the International Maritime Organization at its London headquarters. The code is founded on 4 major principles, which are the basis of the safe transport of potentially dangerous goods by sea. They are simple and effective. Identification and classification of goods offered for shipment. Packing. Correct packing, marking and labeling of packages appropriate to the goods involved and the special circumstances of transport by sea. Handling. Correct handling of dangerous goods at every stage in their transport operation, including stowage and segregation, to minimize the risks in the event of an incident. Information. Correctly documented and declared, so that all concerned are fully aware of what they're dealing with and the procedures to be followed. The code reflects the long experience of most of the world's seafaring nations and takes full account of the special problems of transport by sea. Although there is no room for complacency, experience shows that by following the code's provisions and by the exercise of normal good stevedoring and seamanlike practices, packaged dangerous goods can be carried by sea without incident, whether the goods are flammable, such as ether and alcohol, or gases of various kinds, poisonous pesticides, or whatever. So let's have a look at some of the special considerations involved. Transport of goods by sea can produce stresses much more severe than by land, arising mainly from movement of the ship and vibration. Together, these elements may cause enough strain to loosen poor lashings and shift cargoes, or damage inadequate packaging, with potentially the most serious consequences. The many and varied substances, materials, and articles defined as dangerous goods have been divided into 9 classes to aid identification of the risks and hazards. Class 1, explosives. Class 2, gases, many of which are flammable or poisonous. Class 3, flammable liquids, classified according to flashpoint. Class 4-1, flammable solids. Class 4-2, substances liable to spontaneous combustion. And Class 4-3, substances in which contact with water emit flammable gases. Class 5-1, oxidizing substances or agents. And Class 5-2, organic peroxides. Class 6-1, poisonous and harmful substances. And Class 6-2, infectious substances. Class 7, radioactive materials, Class 8, corrosives, and Class 9, miscellaneous dangerous goods and any other hazardous or polluting goods which cannot be properly covered by Classes 1 to 8. Packages containing dangerous goods must carry the distinctive internationally agreed labels indicating by colour, class, number and symbol the class and nature of the goods involved. And they must also be marked with the proper shipping name of the contents, the United Nations identification number, and with the triangular marine pollutant mark, if applicable. For naming goods, in general, trade names alone will not do. There are certain relaxations allowed in the regulations for dangerous goods in limited quantities, but even then, they must be declared as such. The class number on a label refers to the primary hazard of the substance. Some substances also present a secondary hazard. For example, a flammable may also have corrosive properties and requires a subsidiary risk label containing the symbol for the hazard, but in this case, not the class number. Obviously, freight containers, vehicles, and other cargo transport units packed with dangerous goods must be labelled with the hazards of the goods enclosed. This is done with enlarged labels, known as placards. The United Nations Committee of Experts on the Transport of Dangerous Goods has allocated 4-figure numbers, known as UN numbers, to dangerous goods. These are included in the IMDG code and should always be shown on documents. For full load shipments, they must be shown on or alongside the placards on freight containers, vehicles, and so on. Most dangerous cargoes are flammable gases, liquids, or solids. Poisonous, harmful, and infectious substances. Again, gases, liquids, or solids. Corrosive, acid or alkaline. And some substances which are reactive and can react dangerously when in contact with certain other substances. Let's look at some of the implications of these hazards. Here, you see the effect of hydrochloric acid on zinc filings. First comes the gas hydrogen, flammable and explosive when mixed with air. The heat of the chemical reaction builds up. The liquid even reaches boiling point. And there we stopped the experiment. And here's a cigarette in oxygen. Water is harmless enough in itself, but drop into it a piece of sodium and see what happens. Heat is generated, hydrogen is produced, and eventually the sodium and hydrogen spontaneously ignite. Flammable liquids which vaporize may appear to ignite without direct contact with flame. It's the vapor which is flammable and burns. The temperature at which vapors can be ignited is the flash point. The vapor from this particular liquid has a high flash point, and although it is readily ignited by a direct flame, it is not ignited by a burning cigarette. Just a piece of copper dipped in nitric acid, and note the dangerous red fumes. And many people don't realize that most aerosols have a flammable gas as the propellant, and can send out quite a dangerous jet in contact with flame, even if the substance sprayed is not in itself flammable. And what about this for a simple reaction? Sulfuric acid poured onto sugar. Just look at that. Quite a sobering set of experiments. Hidden dangers, violent reactions. And they were only quite simple. But you don't need detailed chemical knowledge of all these substances to handle them safely. That is what the IMDG code is for. Its provisions have been developed taking all these factors into account to minimize, as far as possible, the risks involved. The IMDG code doesn't by itself have the force of law, but most governments do have legislation based on SOLAS and MARPOL for regulating the transport of dangerous and polluting cargoes by sea. For example, the relevant UK regulations apply to UK ships anywhere and to all ships in UK ports. These regulations do have the force of law and require dangerous goods to be declared, labelled, packaged and handled properly. Usually, this is done by following the procedures in the IMDG code. But in a few instances, the UK recommends variations of the IMDG code, and these are published separately. Similarly, as well as following the IMDG code, some other nations have their own additional national laws and recommendations, which must be complied with whenever a ship goes to those countries. But much of the advice is straightforward, and the procedures all have the same aim: the safe transport of dangerous goods by sea. The IMDG code is a formidable collection of facts, but as mentioned earlier, its contents encompass four main concepts: identification and classification, packing, handling, and information. They are so important that it's worth looking at them one by one to see what they mean in practice. Identification and classification. The whole procedure starts with a written declaration from the shipper to say that the dangerous goods have been identified, classified, packaged, and labelled in accordance with the SOLAS regulations. The shipper must do this before offering goods for shipment. They will not be accepted without a declaration. Packing. To ensure appropriate packing, most classes have been divided into three packaging groups. Packaging Group 1, PG1, Great Danger. Packaging Group 2, PG2, Medium Danger. And Packaging Group 3, PG3, Minor Danger. The IMDG code indicates suitable packagings for individual substances and articles, together with details of the tests, drop test, stacking test, etc., which must be passed to demonstrate that the packagings are suitable. Of course, shippers who export frequently get to know what packaging they should use, but unusual shipments may need reference to the IMDG code or beyond to the competent authority concerned. The packaging, combined with correct stowage and securing as necessary, should prevent a package being damaged in bad weather and other problems that may reasonably be expected to occur during the voyage. A cargo of sulfuric acid could cause havoc if packages were broken during loading or on board. Just think of that jar of sugar with a few drops of acid and what could happen with bags of sugar and a quantity of acid. Comparatively small incidents can have major consequences. Handling. Handling has to be correct at all stages of the transport operation. The code spells out how individual substances should be stowed and segregated aboard ship. For instance, on deck only, or on deck or under deck, the segregation needed, and any other special precautions that should be taken. The amount of segregation required is specified in the IMDG code. Ready reckoner type tables based on the code, like this one, are sometimes helpful. For instance, an infectious substance with this label and a flammable gas with this label give us number 4, and referring to the requirements, we are told separated longitudinally by an intervening complete compartment or hold. Vertical separation alone does not meet this requirement. For on-deck stowage, this segregation means a separation by a distance of at least 24 meters longitudinally. But remember, this kind of table is only an aid to stowage and segregation, and the requirements for each substance, material, and article must be ascertained from the code itself. Information. Accurate and complete information about dangerous cargoes must be available all the way down the line, so everyone knows what procedures should be followed, particularly in emergencies. This is why easy access to shipping documents is so important. To summarize, the shipper must provide correct information about the dangerous goods and must ensure that they're identified, classified, marked, labeled, and packaged correctly, and that the consignment can be carried in accordance with the provisions of the code. On board, the master, assisted by his officers, must be satisfied that the goods are properly marked and labeled, and otherwise in line with the shipper's declaration. Any dangerous goods not properly declared, marked, and labeled should not be loaded. It is the responsibility of the person or persons loading to see that the goods are stowed and segregated in accordance with the recommendations, that adequate ventilation is provided where necessary, that the goods are properly secured, and that readily available is a list of the dangerous goods showing their location on board, or a stowage plan showing full details of the consignment and where stowed. Whilst at sea, regular inspections of the cargo and special checks of the dangerous goods are essential. Good housekeeping on board is a vital part of following the code, and it's equally important to have emergency plans prepared in case an incident occurs that could develop into an accident. These plans should be readily accessible. In this connection, information in the IMDG supplement, such as the emergency procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods, EMS, and the medical first aid guide for accidents involving dangerous goods, MFAG, are of great value. These aspects are dealt with in more detail in the second video in this series, Dangerous Goods at Sea, Part 2. In practice, the master and ship's officers can usually rely upon a considerable degree of help from ashore in following the procedures, either through their company or their agent. And the fire brigade and other emergency response organizations may assist with incidents when the ship is in port. Here again, IMO assists with its published recommendations on dealing with dangerous substances in port areas. But there may be occasions when such assistance is not available. It is then that the principles and concepts of the IMDG code are of a special value and assistance to the master in discharging his responsibilities. And whatever the circumstances and whoever is involved, ashore or afloat, the IMDG code and its supplement provide a sound base for the transport of dangerous goods by sea. But above all, everyone involved must recognize the need for constant vigilance, training, awareness, and plain common sense in the interests of transporting dangerous goods in safety.